Glad you could be here. We're continuing on with updating our carpet calculator to use methods. So we're working on creating methods for the first time. In our carpet calculator, we have changed our main a little bit to take advantage of some of the methods that we've created. As you scroll down, you see that the beginning of our main, after our declarations, we call the display instructions method. And in some languages, they might call that a subroutine or a function or a module. In C#, it's a method. We call the method. Then we use another method, getDimensions, to prompt our user for the length and width of the room. And then we've also updated to call our new getPrice method to prompt the user for the price of the carpet. So we've got our square yard price. Now, as you notice here, we're getting rid of a lot of the miscellaneous code out of our main module, and our main module is turning into just some calls to different methods, and that's very good programming practice. In our main module, we should not have a lot of just stringy code. We should have calls to methods, and then the methods have our actual base code that's performing the work of our application or our program. So we're getting there, but we still have some miscellaneous code just hanging out in our main method. So we're going to fix that up. We have changed this to call the getPrice. I'm going to add a comment there. Call getPrice to prompt the user for the carpet price. All right, so we've already got everything changed to use that. Now, our last few things we have here are the calculation for our square footage, and then our square yards of carpet, and then calculating the cost of the carpet. Let's create some methods to do that. We might need to be able to calculate the square footage or the square yards in another class somewhere. So if we have these set up in a method, it'll make it easier for us to use that from another class. I'm going to scroll down to kind of the bottom of my code. If you do notice, I keep adding my new methods to the end. I had commented the closing curly bracket on the end of my getPrice method, so that's where I'm going to start and add in my next method. The method that I want to create is going to return a double, and my method name is going to be determine square yards. So as I said, we want these things to happen in methods, not just within our main code. Now, in order to determine the square yards, I need some input. I need to know what the width is that I'm working with and the length. So those are two items that are going to be passed to this method as variables or arguments, and I'm going to use them in my method then. I do not need to declare those variables within this method as local variables. Putting them within the parentheses, specifying them as arguments, does the same declaration. So now width and length are both declared in this method as local variables. Their data is going to be coming from the method that calls this method, so we don't know exactly where we're going to be getting that from, but we know in order to determine the square yards, we need to know the width and the length. So let's go ahead and create this method. One thing we want is that square foot per yard constant, and we don't need it in our main method anymore. So I'm going to go grab it, I'm going to cut it out of my main and paste it down in this method. Whenever we create local variables like this, we're being much more efficient with our code because this variable now is only going to be allocated in memory for the duration of my method. So instead of this memory being allocated for this variable for the duration of my entire application, now it's going to be a much quicker allocation just for the duration of this method. Now that is, I believe, the only constant I need. I'm going to go ahead and put a comment in there about that. Declare constant value. And now I'm ready to actually do the calculation, but I do need one more variable. Declare local instance variables. We only need one, and it's going to be double number of square yards. So we'll probably be able to get rid of that out of our main method. We won't need it there anymore. I'm going to calculate that. And my calculation is going to be number of square yards is going to be equal to the length times the width divided by my literal square foot per square yard, that number 9. So notice I can put a number 9 in there, no problem, but then I would be having a literal value in my code, which is very much discouraged. In good programming practice, any sort of value that we want defined, we need to set up as a constant. It makes it easier for other programmers to come along and maintain this program. Not that the square footage per square yard is ever going to change, but if we were working with another type of variable that might change, it would be easier for the programmer coming after us to identify it in this constant and make one change, much more so than finding that number scattered throughout all of the code and then not being sure if that number is really referring to the number of square yards or not. So always use literals whenever we are coding. If you ever get to the point where you're typing a formula and you have an actual number typed in there, you should replace that with a constant and use that literal instead. Okay, we've got it calculated now. Let's return it to our caller. Return, URN, number of square yards, and that's what we need to send back to our caller. I'm going to go ahead and put that this is the end of determine square yards, and then I'll come up here to the beginning, do my 3 slashes to create my documentation. Notice that the XML documentation automatically notes that there are parameters of width and length necessary for this module. Determine square yards takes the width and length and determines the total square yardage. All right, now we've got a new method here. Again, we have to implement it. So we can code it, but we're not using it yet. So we have to put in a call to it to actually make it be used, have something happen. So we're going to go back to our main. Here's our main. I can tell already that I really don't need any more of these constants. So I'm going to get rid of them. I still have code that's using my best carpet one, so I guess I'll wait. I'll wait till we've got this all cleaned up. But as you can tell, we're using fewer and fewer of the variables that we had before because we're making our code more efficient and we're moving some of our processing into methods. All right, in my main, I display instructions, I get the dimensions, I get the price. Now, down here is where we were calculating all that stuff out, and we don't need to do it that way anymore. So we're going to eliminate this line of code. That calculation has moved to our new method. And we are going to keep the next line though, but we're going to change it a little bit. Now, instead of the number of square yards being something that we're calculating in this main method, we're going to say that the number of square yards equals the results from determine square yards, our new method. Determine square yards. Now, we need to send our square yardage program two variables, and look at the IntelliSense editor. Notice how it's finding that method signature and it's helping us. It's saying, hey, in carpet example with class methods determine square yards, notice we don't have to specify our class name because we said determine square yards was a static method, so we can leave that class name off when we call it. But determine square yards expects a double with the value of the width, and that's where we are right now. So I want to send width first, room width. They need to be in the right order. And then next I need a double of the room length. So I'm going to use my variable room length that's already been initialized. So now I've got that call in, and instead of doing that calculation in my main method, I am having it separated out into its own method where it's functionally isolated from the other code because it does something special all on its own and it doesn't need to be mixed up. I'm going to save that, and at that point I could test it just to make sure everything's still working. It's not absolutely necessary, but I always like to test things as I'm going, making sure I'm not messing things up. Yeah, that looks good. It took in 24:45 there. Is that? So hang on. I'll be right back. Hello again. Sorry about that interruption. We were working on putting methods into our code for our carpet calculator, and the last method we had created is our getPrice method. Oh, I'm sorry, no it wasn't. Determine square yards method. And so we have passed our determine square yards method, our room width and room length, and it is performing necessary calculations and returning to us the number of square yards. Now the next method that we're going to implement is a method to calculate the total cost. This is a hard one because it's actually going to create more code in our program than what we currently have. Right now, to calculate our total cost, we only have one line of code, taking our number of square yards times our price per square yard. Well, we're going to really kind of complicate things here because we're going to create a method to do this. Why would we want to do that? We only have one line of code. This is going to take a lot more code to implement in a method. Well, we want to because it is part of programming's best practices. We want to move all of our functional code into methods so that they are callable if we needed to in the future. It is just good programming practice to modularize our code. So I'm going to move again down to the end of my source code file where I have the end of the determine square yards closing curly bracket. I'm going to open up a new line of code and I'm going to start the definition for my calculate price. My price is going to be returned to the calling module in a double, so I'm going to specify my return value is a double. My method name is going to be determine price. This method is going to need some data. It's going to need a double that contains the square yards, and it's going to need another double that contains the price per square yard. These are again local variables because they're defined in my method header. So these two variables, square yard and price per square yard, will be available to the lines of code in this method. My method's going to be really short, one line again. It just returns the price per square yard times the square yards because that's going to be that calculation. So again, we kind of complicated our program a little bit by creating this method, but it's good programming practice. I'm going to go ahead and comment my closing curly bracket and say end of determine price. And I'm going to put a comment at the beginning with my XML comment type, the 3 slashes, and I'm going to say determine price calculates the total price of the carpet. Okay, so now we have everything kind of nicely documented here, and we have our new method, but in order to actually utilize it, to implement that method, we have to call it from our main method. So I'm going to go back up to my main, and right here where I'm calculating the cost of the carpet, my current line of code says to do it this way. I'm going to change that a little bit. I'm going to leave that line of code in so you can see the difference. We're going to see what's going on here, and my program is not calling it properly. It's calling display results instead. So I need to implement another method before I can change my main to do all this. So we're going to see a new method here that's going to call this new determine price method, because we're going to change things up a little bit. The last method that I'm going to create, I swear you're almost done, is going to be called display results. So I'm going to click here at my comment on the end of my determine price method, and I'm going to put in a new one, static void. This one's not going to return any data, display results. Now this one needs some input also. It needs to know the square yards and also the price per square yard. So we're kind of passing some things to this one to use. All right, our display results method, oops, I've got some doublés there. Let me fix those. Sometimes you wish you had Word, you know, because it would autocorrect those. And the IDE is getting there, but it's still not quite there. Okay, fixed up. All I'm going to do in this one are some write commands and some write line commands. First I'm going to do a write line with an empty line. Then I'm going to write out a message using the write command that says the square yards needed, colon, space. Now I'm going to use, I got a weirdo thing there. Let me clean that up. I need a semicolon there, not whatever that was. And so I'm using a write command to put out the square yards needed. Now I'm going to go to a write line. So this is going to end up on that same line and then issue a new line character. So this write line is going to do some formatting. Our first variable is going to be formatted as a number with 2 decimal places. And the data that we're going to format in that way is going to be square yards. We definitely could have made that all one line of code with the write line and concatenated things, or we can do it this way with 2 lines of code. Either way is fine. So it's all just a matter of opinion. And now I'm going to do another write, and this time my message is going to say total cost at, and then again I'm going to do a formatting. I want to do 0C, and the thing that I'm going to format is the price per square yard. Then I'm ready to do a write line, finish this whole thing up, and I'm going to finish up that message. So it says total cost at this certain price that the user has inputted is per, and we're going to label that appropriately, per square yard. Going to do some concatenation here the way the book wants us to. This time another formatting character is currency. And the thing that I want to format as currency, my comma has to go after that closing double quote. The thing I want to format here is currency is going to be what is returned to me by the determine price method when I pass it the square yards and the price per square yard. So in this example, our last method has called one of our earlier methods. So notice our determine price method is not called by our main module, it's being called by our display results module. And that is again some of the flexibility that we get from modularizing our code, from making things a little bit less stringy in our main. Okay, so my display result is done. I'm going to put a comment here at the end and display results, and I'll put my comment at the beginning, 1, 2, 3, display results outputs the final messages to the user. Now again, I need to implement this method. So I'm finally ready to fix everything up in my main. I'm going to go back up there to it. Now, I'm calling my display instructions method. Then I'm calling my getDimension method twice, once to prompt the user for the length and once to prompt the user for the width. Then I'm calling my getPrice method to prompt the user for the price. Now, I am determining the square yards in that method, and I'm down here in my calculate cost of carpet. I really don't need any of that stuff anymore. All I need is a call to my display results method. So display, oops, I'll just delete that stuff out and start it. Okay, right in the right place, display results, and display results expects a double containing the square yards and a double containing the price per square yard. We should have both of those variables already initialized, and we're going to use num of square yards and price per square yard to call that thing. And then the last thing we're going to have is our read line to pause the console. As I mentioned, I'm ready to get rid of now some variables that I'm not using anymore. So let's go up to the top and get rid of all of those. I don't need any of these constants anymore because moving things to my methods has eliminated the need for them in my main module. Now, as I declare variables, I do still need some, and I can tell which ones I don't need because they have the squiggly green line. Backspace to completely close that line. Number of square feet I don't need, and my total cost I do not need. But I do need that semicolon, right? So I'm going to put it there at the end. So now the only variables that I am using in my main are room length, room width, and number of square yards. But I see I have an error. I've obviously eliminated something that I did need, and that's my price per square yard. Put that back in as a double, and those errors should go away. Now I should have everything that I need. I've cleaned up all the variables that I don't need. I have all my methods implemented. I'm going to test one final time. Now at this point in my testing, I would want to do some rigorous testing with many, many different data values to make sure that I wasn't having any sort of issue with my program, no bugs in my code. I'm going to turn to page 170 and see what data they enter. They enter 16 feet, 3 inches. For the width, they enter 14 feet, 7 inches. The price per square yard, they enter 14.95. It tells me that I need 26.33 square yards. It'll total cost of $393.65. Now that does match the output in the book, so I think everything's fine. Of course, we're early on in our development. It would be very easy for us to break this program by entering non-numeric data, but that's something for another day. We'll look at how to take care of that. So I hope you have had luck creating this application. All of the code is available in your book. Please take a look. If you're having any sort of errors or issues, you should be able to find it. Thank you.